Hello, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is Aftermath of Murder Survivor Stories, a multi-part video series produced in support of the National Victims of Crime Week. This series features exclusive interviews with ordinary people who have experienced an extraordinary event, the devastating loss of a loved one through murder. Aftermath of Murder goes behind the headlines as survivors share their stories about the loss, grief, trauma, and the hope for healing in the aftermath of murder. Joining us today is Ernie Crey. In 2000, his 43-year-old sister Dawn disappeared from the Downtown Eastside of Vancouver, and then her DNA was discovered on the farm of serial killer Robert Pickton. Her body was never found. Ernie, thank you for joining us. There's no denying the grim reality behind how Robert Pickton killed these women.
There's absolutely nothing pretty about it at all. It was a major tragedy here in the lower mainland of British Columbia, one experienced by many families and one that continues to resonate with British Columbia residents and, of course, the families that were most directly affected.
How did it affect you and your family?
Well, it affected us profoundly. Dawn was our sister. She was the fourth children in a group of 9 siblings. As we were growing up in Hope, we, the older children, of course, had the responsibility, like many older siblings, of looking after the younger ones. So she was my younger sister, and I changed her diapers when she was an infant and fed her pablum and made sure she was safe. We were all close when we were a family together. Later we were to be separated, but we were a close family.
What were the circumstances that brought Robert Pickton to cross paths with Dawn?
My sister lived in the Downtown East Side later in her life, the only place she could afford to live in the city, and he was doing his hunting there. He made the Downtown East Side of Vancouver his hunting ground. That's where he found his victims, women that he thought no one cared about, women that he thought he could prey upon, women that he thought he could remove from the streets and who wouldn't be missed. He did that directly himself, or he did that with the help of Confederates.
So describe what was happening when they got to the farm.
Well, based on the trial, the pre-trial, the trial itself, the evidence that came forward, and the things that people can read in the newspapers, what happened on the pig farm wasn't pretty at all. These women were ruthlessly and brutally killed by this man. There are stories of women being hung up and slaughtered. There are stories about the remains being reduced and put through a wood chipper, and what remained of them, those remains disposed of in the Downtown East Side of Vancouver.
And on the farm.
And on the farm. And indeed, women's remains, some of his victims' remains, were actually found on the property, body parts.
And what about your sister?
Well, all that remained of my sister was a blood stain on an undergarment in the trailer in which Mr. Pickton lived. There were no other remains.
It's hard to imagine the kinds of things going on in Pickton's brain. He's sick and twisted. What are your thoughts?
Well, whatever his problem was, whatever formed his character was, and I'm not sure what all those influences would have been that made him the man he was, but surely it included living under the thumb of a very powerful female figure. Surely it included being humiliated by females when he was a young man, perhaps rejected, perhaps scorned, and perhaps laughed at. I think that was key to his personality, and I think when he got older and when he commenced his killing spree, I think this was a big act of vengeance. This was his turn to be in complete control of his victims. And he reveled in the butchery of these women. This is when he was the center of the world, completely within his grip.
When I think to what these women must have been experiencing and thinking at that time is horrifying.
Well, it It is horrifying to contemplate this, but it's important that we understand this.
Why?
Well, we need to take lessons if we're a policing agency. We need to take lessons if we're government officials responsible for the carrying out justice, in this case in the province of British Columbia, but here in the Lower Mainland. It speaks to the need for us to learn if we're neighbors of such a person, or a family member of such an individual, or if we're a friend of such an individual. There are many lessons to be taken from this. And indeed, one of the lessons, the most powerful lessons, was to the policing agencies. I don't have to accuse them of anything. They themselves, the Vancouver Police Department and the RCMP, have apologized to the families for the manner in which they carried out this investigation. They admitted to the faults and shortcomings in their investigation.
Many women had been going missing, and basically the concerns of the families just were not taken seriously.
All the way from laying a complaint in the reception area of the Vancouver Police Department, all the way through to the senior officers who were ultimately put in the charge of all the files involved where these missing women were concerned, not just with the Vancouver Police Department, but with the Port Coquitlam RCMP. There are many lessons for them to take from this, and I think they're learning them. Indeed, I hope they're learning them, because this will be key to preventing any such occurrence like this again here in British Columbia and perhaps elsewhere in Canada.
Now, you're doing a bunch of advocacy work in this area with an organization called Alive?
Alive.
Tell us about that.
I thought I owed it to the memory of my sister to go to the Downtown Eastside and take action to help change the circumstances down there. Even though this investigation was concluded, somebody has been convicted of these serious crimes that is now doing a lifetime in jail. Unfortunately, there are still men that go to the Downtown Eastside and prey on these women, because still there's this perception, this acceptance of this idea that you can take impoverished women, white women, Aboriginal women, and do with them as you wish. Do with them as you please. This is what we need to stop, and we can only do it as a society, policing agencies, government, and civic groups and organizations such as the one I now lead in the Downtown Eastside, namely Alive. And so rather than sit at home and live with the grief that still follows me, still haunts me, and all the rest of my siblings over the loss of our sister, I decided I'll do something with it. I just won't sit at home.
Have you attended homicide law support groups as a result of this?
No.
Why not?
Well, it might be something for me to consider. It certainly should be for others, but and I'm not above all the grief and the sense of loss that goes along with a crime like this. I haven't made peace with any of this, but I understand what has happened here. I understand how it's affecting me.
Do you take any solace from your background, your Aboriginal background?
Yes, and that's where a lot of my support comes from. It comes from the spiritual traditions of my community, and folks in my community who harbor that knowledge or have that knowledge, possess that knowledge, have been there at my side from the very outset. They've been a real support to me. I don't sit alone, and I wouldn't recommend anyone that's had an experience like this ever to sit alone. They need to be with other people. They need to share their experiences, whether it's with friends or relatives, support groups in the community, or specific groups who deal with this kind of an experience, which is extraordinary, exceptionally hard to deal with, and I think we give it too little attention in this society, in my opinion.
If you or someone you know has experienced a loss through homicide, Go to the BC Victims of Homicide website at bcvoh.com to find available resources and information on upcoming support groups. If you're interested in volunteering or to make a donation, visit the BC Bereavement Helpline website. This has been Aftermath of Murder Survivor Stories.